This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
I graduated from the University of Melbourne with a BA in psychology 2019 and got her first honours in psychology as well in 2020. She's now a third-year PhD student working with Adam Osth. All right. Everybody says my name wrong, so I'll take the license to say everybody's name wrong, but I'm trying. And her research is focused on investigating the three-way relationship between confidence, response latency, and accuracy using a decision model. So please, Haomin, take it away.
The aerial was rounded out a little bit.
Okay.
So I think if you can try and make up Haomin, because it'll be easier for him.
Okay. We'll try to make it short.
Maybe here?
Here?
Hello?
Where do you want to put it in your
In my pocket?
Yeah.
Sure.
Just clip here.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah, I think so.
I think maybe this bit is the annoying, so maybe try not to let it.
Okay.
Try the mic.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Great, thank you. Okay, let's start. Hi everyone, I'm Haomin. So today I'll be talking about different models of response latency and confidence within the linear ballistic accumulator framework. So first of all, I want to acknowledge all the other authors. So Professor Andrew Heathcote, Dr. James Sauer, Dr. Matthew Palmer, and Dr. Ethan Osth. So a lot of works have been focused on interested in the relationship between confidence and accuracy, or
You probably don't need to hold the mic.
Oh, okay.
Hear you.
Oh, great.
That's going to be very uncomfortable for you. I think you're actually, as far as volume goes,
Yeah,
just
sure.
having it sitting on your
Yeah.
right there.
So, I should start again. A lot of work have been interested in the relationship between confidence and accuracy, and between accuracy and response latency. But few of them have looked at how these three measures can interact with each other. And also some computational models of accuracy tend to focus on confidence but not latency. So the question we ask here is, how can we use a unified framework to account for the complicated three-way relationship among confidence, response latency, and accuracy? To get to the answer, we broke up this big question into some smaller ones. The first one is, how exactly do people make confidence judgments? So Radcliffe and Stearns published a paper in 2009, which beautifully demonstrates a range of ways that confidence can be constructed. On one hand, confidence itself can be directly accumulated. This represents the idea that confidence is essentially a multi-alternative decision-making problem. So it's almost like you're choosing between the confidence options. So Radcliffe and Stearns' response time and confidence model is an example that captures this idea. On the other hand, confidence can be product of other processes. For example, it can be derived from a comparison between evidence strength between choice alternatives, as described by Wicker's balance of evidence model. So this mechanism represents the idea that if you have a lot of evidence in one alternative, but not so much for the other, then you're probably very confident. But if you have equal level of evidence for both, then you're probably not very confident. So confidence can also be a product of time. So when people take a long time to make a decision, they will just assume that they are not very confident. But if they can respond very quickly, then they are probably very confident. So alternatively, confidence can be product of an additional accumulation process after choice. But this post-decision accumulation is something that's only possible with two-stage judgment. So where you make a choice first and then the confidence judgment. But in our study, we're only doing simultaneous judgment between of choice and confidence. So the overarching goal here is to test and compare the first three approaches. Now we know we can construct different models based on how they approach confidence, but how do we make sure that when we find any difference in the model performance, it's due to the difference in the confidence computation, but not to other processes in the accumulation process, such as noise during the accumulation process. So that's how, how do we compare the models fairly? So this is the reason why we need to set a common ground for testing comparing the models. We chose one of the evidence accumulation model, the linear ballistic accumulator, as a common framework for all of our models. The family of evidence accumulation models have been quite successful with RT and accuracy, but the extension to confidence is still in its infancy, and that's what we explore in this study. So in LBA, each decision alternative is associated with an accumulator. In each decision trial, evidence begins to accumulate from a random point that's sampled from a uniform distribution with height A. The B parameter here represents the distance between the heights of the uniform distribution and the decision boundary. So evidence will accumulate with a drift rate V, then sample from a normal distribution. The memory strength of the item will determine the mean drift rate, and higher drift rate will produce faster accumulation to the decision boundary. So when one of the accumulator reaches the decision boundary, it triggers the corresponding response. So in this case, it's an old response. And the response time is determined by the time taken for the accumulator to reach the threshold, plus the non-decision time, that's for encoding and responding. So LBA does not have within trial noise during the decision process. This means that the race dynamics are determined at the point of initiation. There are a few advantages of using this LBA architecture. So first of all, the models will be much easier to fit. Second, it will be easier for us to generalize our models to any number of decision alternatives. And finally, by having a cross-trial variability in drift rates and starting points, we can capture the relative speed of correct and error response as well. So we have now the common ground for testing and comparing the models. So how exactly do we use this confidence mechanism in our models, and what would the models be like? So I will start with the direct accumulation approach. This model is very similar to the RT-Con models that assume confidence itself can be directly accumulated, but instead of diffusion processes, use LBA. Like RT-Con, it is assumed that each test atom is associated with a normally distributed level of activation. The mean of the distribution is freely estimated, but the standard deviation is fixed to 1 to prevent identification issue. Well, we previously talked about how this model treats confidence as essentially as a multi-alternative decision-making problem, right? So the problem is, how do we use this distribution here to generate evidence for each confidence alternative? Well, we can get the idea first by looking at a two-choice decision. So what we do is we apply a criterion to partition the distribution into two bins, one for old and one for new. So the criterion is freely estimated but fixed across target and lowers. The areas under each bin are then translated into drift rates for each decision accumulated. The partitioning we use here is to capture the idea that evidence for the adjacent alternative should be correlated with each other. So if we shift this distribution towards the right, you will essentially get more evidence for the old response and less evidence for the new response. Now, if we want to account for confidence responses, we can add more confidence criteria and partition the distribution into more bins, because confidence option can just be seen as additional alternatives. For a judgment with two levels of confidence, high and low, we can divide the distribution into 4 bins. This corresponds to 4 accumulators for 4 confidence options. The middle ones are for the low confidence responses, and also one for the high confidence responses. These accumulators will compete with each other, and when one of them reaches its threshold, we will get both choice and confidence judgments. In this case, we have a high confidence old response. To account for a higher number of confidence options, we just keep dividing the distribution into more bins and have more accumulators. So that's for this confidence accumulator model. I'll now move on to the balance of evidence approach. The multiple threshold race model is recently proposed by Reynolds et al., which assumes that confidence is computed from a comparison between accumulators. The MTR model instantiates the balance of evidence hypothesis by saying that confidence is determined by the difference between evidence. So larger difference between evidence means you have higher confidence. For a simple two-choice decision, it's basically the same as the LBA model, but we additionally allow the accumulators to be correlated. The main difference between this model and the LBA model is that it has additional confidence threshold. The purpose of having this additional confidence threshold is to take the continuous balance of the evidence and map that onto discrete confidence categories. So to what point can we say we have large enough difference to produce high confidence responses? So for example, for a 4-point confidence scale, there's an additional confidence threshold in each accumulator. In each decision trial, the winning accumulator determines both the RT and the choice. And in this case, it's an odd response. So how confidence is derived is by looking at the position of the losing accumulator. So if the losing accumulator has not crossed the confidence threshold, then we say it's a high confidence response because we have large difference in evidence. If the losing accumulator has crossed the confidence threshold, then we say it's a low confidence response. This model is simpler than the confidence accumulator model in the sense that to account for a high number of confidence options, we don't need to include additional accumulators. Instead, we can just add more confidence threshold in. And finally, there is the timing approach. This is a new model we propose, which only uses subjective time to derive confidence. With an all-new decision, this model is exactly the same as the basic LBA model or the two-choice MTR model without the correlation. How it differs from MTR is that instead of comparing between the decision accumulators, it uses an additional timing accumulator that serves as a subjective measure of time to calculate confidence. The reason for having this additional accumulator for subjective time is that it's theoretically consistent with a psychological construction of time and the idea that time determines confidence. So some theoretical works like Simon's Law 2016 have been using diffusion models as an effective measure to get a sense of how much time that has elapsed. So that's the reasoning for the timing accumulator here. Again, we apply confidence threshold with this timer to map out the discrete confidence levels. When the decision accumulator are racing with each other, at the same time there's this timer that keeps track of the time. So when one of the decision accumulator that reaches its threshold and determines the choice, we check the position of the timer for confidence. So same rule is applied here. If the timer has not crossed the confidence threshold, then we say it's a high confidence response. But keep in mind that this timer is not checking the theoretical time here. It's that your inner sense of how much time that has elapsed. So even if you stop people at exactly the same time across different trials, people will vary on the amount of time they judge that has passed. So it's not like within an objective time interval, say like from 500 milliseconds, all the responses you make are high confidence. Instead, you can have slow high confidence responses or fast low confidence responses, depending on how fast you think the time has passed. So it's represented by the drift rate of the timer here. And this timing drift rate will stay the same across all stimulus types. This model is similar to the MTR model in another sense that you can account for more confidence options by simply adding confidence thresholds. So now we know we can construct different models based on how they approach confidence differently. So the next question is, how can we test and compare these models? Can we put some constraint on one of them and see if their performance differ? Remember, we have this confidence accumulator model that treats confidence essentially as multi-alternative decision-making problem. So the classic way to constrain multi-alternative decision-making models is to manipulate the number of decision alternatives. So that's basically what we do in this experiment. We manipulated the number of confidence options within subjects in recognition memory task. Participants were given either 2 options, 4 options, 6 options confidence scale to respond with. Basically, it's the same recognition task across all conditions. They only differ in how many options they were given to respond. So there were also some difficulty manipulations. So we had words with high or low word frequency. So generally speaking, low frequency words are easier to remember and high frequency words are harder. So we thought this could put some constraint on the confidence accumulator model, because as Hicks' law suggests, RT will get slower as we increase the number of alternatives. But in the confidence accumulator model, increasing the number of confidence options is basically increasing the number of accumulators. So by virtue of having multiple accumulators, it will kind of force faster decisions because you have greater chance to set higher drift rates. So this goes against the Hicks law. But just a spoiler alert, the model ends up doing okay. This may be because the speed up is kind of balanced out by the way evidence is partitioned. So if you think of when we go from 2 options to 6 options, you're not just having multiple accumulators that speed things up. At the same time, you're also partitioning the evidence distribution into more and smaller bins, so they kind of slow things down at the same time. So the model ends up doing reasonably well. This experiment also provides a validity test for all of our models in a way that they have to capture the three-way relationship between confidence, accuracy, and latency, and capturing the changes across different scales, while at the same time producing sensible changes in the model parameters. So by sensible, I mean that although there are all kinds of parameters that the model can vary to capture the changes across scales, but there's no sensible explanation for why the parameters that represent memory strength should change, because using what kinds of scale should not affect how strong your memory is for the item. So if we want to say a model is good or valid, they should be able to capture the changes while keeping those memory strength parameters stay constant. So the experiment we use here use a standardless memory paradigm where you get to view a starter list first with words presented one at a time. Then there's the distractor task. And finally, you get a test list where you need to tell whether you have seen each of the test items before using one of the confidence scales. So I just told you that there are certain parameters in each model that represent memory strength and therefore should stay constant when we vary the scales, right? So you may now wonder, what are those parameters? So in the MTR model, because the drift rate is what's determined by the memory strength, so constant drift rate across scales will give us constant memory representation. Same thing here with the timing model. For the confidence accumulator model, when we compute the drift rates, there's this scaling parameters in the equation. So because the sum of all the drift rate is just the integral of the distribution, scaling the drift rate differently will produce a very different sum and suggest a very different level of activation. So this scaling parameter here should also stay constant. The original article model failed to keep this parameter constant when capturing changes across different number of confidence options. So now you have all the knowledge for the models and the experiment. Let's look at some results. For mean RT across conditions, longer confidence scale were associated with slower RTs, which is consistent with Benjamin et al.'s finding and also the Higgs law. For the mean accuracies across conditions, there are slightly lower accuracies in the longer scale, but the differences are not very obvious. So changing the number of confidence options may not affect performance accuracy. We then use the hierarchical Bayesian techniques to fit our models. The model selection using WAC value favor the confidence accumulator model. So we first look at how the model can capture the relationship between confidence and accuracy. The black dots here represent the data. The colored stars are the model predictions. So the green stars are for the MTR model, the blue stars are for the timing model, the red stars are for the confidence accumulator model. So in two choice conditions, we separated the responses based on two levels, so high or low word frequency, and also old or new responses. You can see that the fits are quite similar here, because for a two choice task, all the models behave very much like the basic LBA model. In four choice condition, we further separated the responses into high or low confidence. The data here is consistent with the shape of the confidence accuracy curves in previous literature, where low confidence responses are less accurate, so you get to see these U-shaped curves. All models were able to capture this positive relationship between confidence and accuracy. In six choice condition, again you see the same U-shaped curves. Overall, the MTR model seems to provide a better fit, while the timing model and the confidence accumulator model, so the blue and the red stars here, misfit more, especially in this sixth choice condition. But it's quite hard to judge from the plot to say who is performing better. All models were able to capture the overall relationship. So sometimes one model fits better here, but misfit more there. So it's quite hard to say who performs better. So we took another look at whether the model were able to capture the relationship between confidence and RT. Here we summarize the RT distribution by the 0.1, 0.5, and 0.9 quantiles, so which represents the 10th, 50th, and 90th percentile of the distribution. We further separated the responses into correct and incorrect ones. Again, in two choice condition, the fits are quite similar. In four choice condition, consistent with previous literature, we observe faster RTs for the high confidence responses, so you can see the Bowing effects here. And all models were able to capture the negative relationship between confidence and RT. In sixth choice condition, you see the Bowing effects again. The confidence accumulator model seem to fit better overall, while the MTR and the timing model, so the green and the blue stars here, tend to misfit more on the point-9 quantiles, especially in this sixth choice condition. But it's also quite clear that all three models are fitting quite well across the conditions, so they're all capturing the faster artists in the 2-choice condition and the slower artists in the 4 and 6 choice condition. So we're actually quite surprised to see that all models were performing similarly. The timing model performs surprisingly well here, despite the fact that it's actually more constrained than the NTR model, because we didn't separately estimate the confidence threshold for all and no responses. So you can see here, although the model selection favored the confidence accumulator model, each of these three models have various strengths and weaknesses in addressing the data. So for example, the confidence accumulator model fits the RT data well, but not so much with the accuracy data, while the reverse is true for the MTR model. And the timing model has its own advantage in addressing multi-alternative decisions, but it's not the focus of this study. And we won't just base all our decisions on model selection. What's more important is whether the model provides clear and interpretable parameters. So to look at whether our models produce sensible parameter changes, we additionally allow the key parameters that represent memory strength to vary across conditions. What we found is that the key parameters in each model were only minimally affected when we altered the number of confidence options. So for the MTR model here, when we allow all kinds of parameters like the starting points, the decision boundary, the non-decision time, and the drift rate to vary across the different scales, you can see that especially the decision threshold here are largely affected by the manipulation. But for the drift rates, they're not varying by much. The mean values are not varying. The mean values are not that different across the scales, and especially the error bars are overlapping with each other. So that suggests that the drift rate essentially stays constant across the scales. Same thing here with the timing model. The threshold vary quite a lot, but for the drift rate here, they're not varying by much. Although the mean value may differ a little bit, but the error bars are still overlapping. So we should be able to say that the drift rate were not largely affected by the manipulation. And for the confidence accumulator model, again, you can see the overlapping error bars in the scaling parameters. So that also suggests its validity. So all models were able to produce reasonable fits with sensible parameter changes. Now the problem is we haven't found a winner yet. What else can we do? Well, we are trying to evaluate our models based on how well they can recover the parameters. Alternatively, we are also putting up new experiments that tries to constrain the timing model in particular by using the speed accuracy manipulations. So basically what the timing model suggests is that the faster you respond, the more confident you are. So if you force people to go quickly under conditions that actually sacrifice accuracy, the timing model will make a counterintuitive prediction that the people will be more confident, which is probably not the case here. But it's quite likely that the final conclusion we make is that there's no winner. So maybe all three mechanisms can coexist with each other, and maybe the people involved in different strategies when they do different tasks. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can you have some talks before we move on? Ali?
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I wanted to piggyback on the most recent idea that you came up with, that it might be down to individual differences. And we know that people differ in their confidence and reliance on it. And there is some work in Martin's group with precision priors being different, having different weightings in different populations, like autism versus healthy control. So can you speak a little bit about that, the inter-individual differences in confidence and the task performance here? Would it matter?
Well, we de-analyze data at the individual participant level, so they do vary quite a lot with the pattern with confidence accuracy relationship and confidence RT relationship. But in the model fits here, we kind of get away with that problem by using the hierarchical Bayesian techniques. So that what that techniques does is like it kind of puts data that at individual participant level towards the group mean. So that kind of fix the problem for our model fitting, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for the talk. That was really interesting. I was curious more about the difference between the threshold parameter in sort of standard evidence accumulation models and confidence generally. Because in my mind, threshold, is sort of supposed to be a measure of response caution, and it seems to me like that's quite similar to confidence. I can see how they're not exactly the same, but I was curious if you could comment on the specific sort of theoretical differences between just the standard threshold parameter and confidence, and when you might expect them to differ, like when you couldn't use threshold as a measure of confidence, and you could actually do sort of these kinds of models.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the problem, the difference here between the confidence and threshold is that threshold only tells like when you end the race between the accumulators, but it doesn't give you too much information about what confidence category you are in. So I think essentially what we do here with the different models is try to map that continuous evidence onto discrete confidence categories. So for example, like the timing model, you can see that what the threshold does is that it tells you when the race ends and how much time it has passed. But with the timing accumulator, we can actually use that information, that subjective time, to put that into discrete confidence levels, and we can say like at what time when the race ends is a high confidence response, and at what time is a low confidence response. Does that answer your question?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. We might move on to the next talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.